Hi guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back again. Today's video is a little bit different. So we're doing a review of this Artistry by Altenew. They just came out with some watercolor tube paints. They also sent me a 5-pack of watercolor brushes and then some hot and cold press paper. So in the set, they are open stock, so you can buy them individually as well. But in the 10-piece set, you get a titanium white, a quinacridone magenta, a toluidine red, permanent yellow deep, an opera lemon, which is like a fluorescent yellow, phthalo green, dark cyan, Prussian blue, phthalo blue, and quinacridone violet. They also sent me a palette, but you guys know I try to be as transparent as possible. Watercolor, while I do dabble in a bit, is not my go-to medium, and so I don't have any pans to kind of fill them up and drop them into my palette here. So I am going to just use the mixing portion. I'm just going to open them up. I had just painted my nails. And so they were dry, but they were still like a little bit, like they hadn't cured. And so I certainly wasn't going to be sticking my finger in opening these boxes. So I used tweezers to do it. But I'm just going to go through and I'm going to squeeze a little bit out. And then we're going to get in and take a little bit more of a look at these. So to test for transparency and just kind of see how they water out, I am using the Altenew hot press paper. And I just picked the hot press because they sent me the larger pack of that versus the smaller pack of the cold press. I'm going to be honest with you, my preferred watercolor paper is cold press, and that's what I normally use. But there's nothing wrong with hot press. So I gave myself some grids here, and then also that dark line, you do want to use a waterproof. For me, I used a Copic, so it's an alcohol marker, so it's not going to bleed. And then we're just going to go through and swatch these. So this is the magenta. Beautiful, beautiful color. Like probably one of my favorites. And then the red, I did go in rainbow color. One of the first things I noticed is this is a super bright palette. Very, very bright. Most of the watercolors that I own are a bit more muted. And so I was surprised to see so many bright rainbow colors. There are no neutrals in the set. Not that you can't mix them yourself, but I feel like a card maker maybe wouldn't necessarily have that information on how to mix them. You'll see once we get to the painting portion. I do mix a few of my own colors to get more muted colors, but I don't necessarily know that that's everyday common knowledge. But I can tell you, after doing these little swatches in the test, these are all, with the exception of the titanium white, which you would expect, these are all super transparent. They weren't, like, they didn't have a lot of granulation. Even the blues, which is pretty common for those, they were really, really transparent. So for stamping or watercoloring your stamped images, you're not going to have anything that's going to like chalk up your black outline for when you're stamping. But these are not, Altenew isn't marketing these to card makers. They are marketing them as fine art paints. So that doesn't mean that you can't use them as a card maker. You obviously can. But that's just not their goal audience. And so I kind of looked at them the way that they intended them to be. I don't necessarily know that a fine artist would 100% love this bright palette. Now, me as a card maker, I'm here for it. But I don't necessarily know, in painting landscapes and things like that, if you would keep wanting to have to mix your neutrals. But they did say that they are coming out with more colors. So maybe they're just, they'll do a neutral pack or something like that. Let's talk about what we're doing here. So I didn't spend a ton of time on the sketch because honestly, the sketch wasn't the important part. It was just to see kind of what I could do with the paints. And I recently have been had on my mind to sit down and practice some cone flowers. And So I was like, well, this is as good as time as any. So these are these are my first cone flowers that I'm bringing to you. But I think that they're super pretty, and they were fast enough for me to sketch. It's a really, really stiff sketch. Like, I can look at that and acknowledge it. There's not a lot of movement or interest. But the purpose of it wasn't necessarily to have a fine art piece for me. It was really just to play around with the paints and see kind of how they moved, how they went down, how they mixed, different things like that. So that's what we're going to do after we get our sketch done. But I do like to include that portion because I know some of you guys enjoy seeing that. Even at fast speed, which is what it is, because I do not draw. No, folks, I do not draw this fast. But it was a pretty quick one. I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about composition. I basically picked an odd number of flowers and then looked at some photos of coneflowers to see what their leaves look like, and then just went on my merry way with my painting. I am going to use a kneading eraser to just pick up the majority of my pencil, so it will be harder to see on camera, but I can still see it so that I can paint over it, and this is just obviously to have a nicer result in the end, though you will see once we get there that I do a bit of a outline. So here, let's talk about mixing colors. I already, for the centers, I knew I was going to use the permanent yellow deep, but right away I realized that I'm not going to be able to get any dimension unless I mix up some colors because of the brightness of the palette. So I took a little bit of the yellow, I mixed it with some Prussian blue, and then I added in a bit of red to create the much darker brown. For the lighter, warmer brown, I used the permanent yellow deep, and then just a tiny bit of red and a tiny bit of green. And that just gave me a much warmer color. And so I'm laying down the, I did have some bristles that kind of, came out. So I don't know, these brushes, we all have brushes that we like. They're not bad, but I did have some bristles that kind of came out. Anywho, so I went in with the like unadulterated color for my base, and then I started tapping in some of the darker colors just to get some kind of shading going on. And then I'm going to let that dry. I am, again, working on the hot press paper, so it is going to stay wet a little bit longer, but I'm not using a ton of water. So going in for the coneflower, again, I have not mixed the magenta with anything. I've just kind of watered it down a bit to be lighter. And I'm going to go in and do my first layer of color. These went down really easy, but I wasn't doing like expressive watercolor. I was curious to see how they bled. So I did at the end do just like a little bit of a background, but when I'm watercoloring, I like a tighter look for the majority of it. Unless, the intention is to be loose. But I mean, if I'm going in and I'm watercoloring a flower, for the most part, it's going to be pretty tight. It's not going to be loose. And so really just went in again, just watered down, magenta. And I didn't have any, like, they were a very pretty color. They are obviously very bright. But again, in order to get some depth, we're going to have to do some color mixing to, make sure that they don't look, I don't, what is the word? Like, they don't look ridiculous, with those super, super bright colors. So what are some other things that I noticed? With the paper, I don't know. I guess it just didn't bloom as much as I'm kind of used to. Like, the water didn't spread as far as what I'm used to. And again, I normally work on cold press, so that could be just, the working on hot press, that it's much more controlled and much more detailed. I do know people typically say that you can get much more detailed painting on hot press. So that might just be the way that works. But again, this is not like my go-to medium. So here what I'm doing is I'm still using the magenta. I'm just using a little bit less water so that I can start to create the petals that are underneath that would be a bit darker and a bit more shadowed. So just going to go in and lay all those down, and then I'll just build up the color as I need. I am going to mix in a little bit of that violet for some of the under petals, just again pull in another color, add a little bit more interest, and deepen up that pink a bit. So yeah, let's talk price point, because this is the rub for me. These are anywhere between $7.99 and $9.99 per tube. You do get a discount if you buy the whole bundle. Or there is another, like, where you can just buy the primaries and you do get a discount. For me, this is the biggest con, is the price point. Because it's expensive. That's expensive. Especially when, like, I know, so my normal watercolor go-tos are Daniel Smith's. And I know over on, like, Dick Blick, I can get them for anywhere between $6 to $8. And again, they do have bundles that are discounted. Like, their primaries are $30, where the primaries for the Altenew Artistry tubes are $50. So I don't know. I wouldn't, they do not perform poorly, in my opinion, for what I use them for. Now, again, I didn't use them for super loose watercolor. I didn't use them for super expressive watercolor. They mixed well. They were easy to work with, all of those things. But, you know, you'll have to decide for yourself what you're willing to spend. You know, they are light fast. Does that matter to a card maker? Honestly, I don't know, because I'm a person who typically colors with Copics, and they're not. You know, if I send you a card, I mean, who are we kidding? If I send you a card, you know, with Copic coloring, and you leave it in the sun, it will fade. So I don't know necessarily that that's the most important thing, but again, they're not marketing this for card makers. They're marketing it for professional artists. So just, you know, I like to kind of bring you guys, you know, what I come across, and Altenew, you know, was nice enough to send them to me, and they have so many great even, you know, products that they offer. But do I know if I would spend my dollars on these? I honestly don't know that I would. I think that they're beautiful. I personally love the rainbow color palette, but I could see how that would be unappealing to more of a, you know, fine art artist. I can just give you the information, and you'll have to do with it what you will. So, in order to get those, like, a little bit more muted color for my shadows, for my coneflowers, I mixed the violet and the magenta, but then I added in a little bit of that permanent yellow deep. Basically, anytime you're trying to mute a color down, you want to mix in its complement. Not a ton of its complement, just a little bit. So if you're looking for a purple, you're just going to add a little bit of yellow. If you're looking for a yellow, you're just going to add in a little bit of purple. You see what I'm saying? You don't want it to be too crazy. So in order to knock back my greens, because all these greens are, I mean, this phthalo green is bright. It is bright. It's not a green I think you would normally see in nature. But I mixed it with just a little bit of the red. And then I did mix it to create more of a yellow green. I did mix it with a bit of that opera lemon, that kind of neon yellow color. That color baffles me a little bit, because it just doesn't seem like it goes with the rest of them. I don't know. I feel like maybe they would have been suited better to put in, like a burnt sienna or a yellow ochre or something like that. But anywho, nonetheless, this is the color palette. And so I just went in, mixed some of those greens again, knocking them back. There were some, that I mixed in a little bit more red, which does make it much, in this case, much cooler and much more brown. But I do like bright colors. So for the most part, I kind of let them bright and let them shine. Here, these super bright portions that you see are where the leaf is turned up. Because almost all of the pictures that I saw of the coneflowers, the leaves are viewed from the side. They must be they must curl up on themselves quite a bit. But I probably should have done more subject study before I decided I was going to draw them and then paint them. But, again, it's not about the sketch. It's about the paints and seeing how they work together. But as far as mixing was concerned, they mixed really, really well, and they were easy to work with. It was quite easy, with a little bit of color theory to make them more muted and get more of the shades that I would like. The only thing that I did not test out was the lifting, how easy it was to lift them. That I can't attest to. I probably should have tested that, but I did not. This is where I wanted to test kind of like the blooming properties. What happens when you just drop the color into a wet surface. It honestly did not travel as far as I thought that it would. And again, I have a very strong feeling that is just my paper. But so I put down just clean water, and then I mixed a little bit of the Prussian blue and a little bit of the dark cyan, just whatever I happened to pick up on my brush, and I kind of dropped that into the background. Here you can see I very much have an obvious edge, so I did have to go back in and re-wet that. And then I just learned as I went, I needed to put down substantially more water to get it to kind of move and be softer. So it did, once I figured out what I was doing wrong, it was definitely user error, I think. They did bloom out quite nicely into the background to create, a softer look, which I do enjoy. And again, we're just going to speed this up so that you can kind of see how it all gets finished out. This was super simple. Nothing too fancy here. Just trying to test them out and see how they work, how they move, their properties, things like that. And then once this was completely dry, not everybody's going to like this. But I think it's kind of fun and whimsical. So I did go back in and just do some kind of like sketchy lines. Did I completely outline everything in its perfection? No. Sometimes my black outline was a little bit outside of the colored lines. That was fine. Sometimes they were a little bit scratchy or a little bit thinner. Also fine, because again, it's not necessarily meant to be perfection. But I like a black outline, and I think it makes it a little bit more fun. And I think it provides it a little bit more movement, whereas before it just felt super, super stiff, and it is. But this helped it along. Just wanted to mention for the center, I just did some like little V's and U's and things like that just to create a little bit of shape in there. And then I did, when I was going through, put in a bit of that titanium white into the centers for some highlights. The mixture that I used just was not strong enough. You can see it in there a bit, but it's very, it's super transparent. So I did go in with a white gel pen and add some white highlights. This doesn't bother me to mix mediums. If it does bother you, by all means, you could go back in there with your watercolors and do what you needed to do. But this is the final piece. In summary, they are good products, but they are expensive products. And so you'll have to make a choice about your own investment. I hope that this was super helpful for you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.